The moment the platinum name card hit the floor and was ground beneath a polished Italian leather heel, I did not raise my voice. I did not clench my fists. I simply looked at my vintage Patek Philippe watch. It was exactly 8:14 p.m. The young man smirking in front of me, reeking of arrogance and cheap cologne, had absolutely no idea he had just signed the death warrant for his family's multi-billion-dollar commercial real estate empire. My name is Harrison Vance. I am 58 years old, and after 3 decades of navigating the shark-infested waters of institutional venture capital, I have learned one universal truth. The loudest people in the room are inevitably the most fragile. We were sitting at table 3, the premier VIP section of the Thorn Enterprises annual gala. The air in the grand ballroom of the plaza was thick with the scent of overpriced perfume, crystal champagne flutes clinking, and the low, desperate hum of sycophantic networking. My executive assistant, Clara Jenkins, sat to my left, reviewing the final terms of a $1.3 billion capital injection on her encrypted tablet. The deal was meticulously structured and set to be executed the following morning, a desperate lifeline that Thorn Enterprises needed to survive a catastrophic looming debt crisis. Then Julian Thorn arrived. At 26 years old, he carried the unearned title of Vice President of Global Business Development, a position handed to him solely because his last name matched the logo on the building. He was accompanied by a young woman draped in excessive diamonds, her nose tilted upward as if the very oxygen in the room was not quite pure enough for her lungs. Julian did not ask. He did not consult the seating chart. He walked straight to our table and drummed his fingers on the polished mahogany surface. "This seat is taken," he declared, his voice dripping with unbearable condescension. I did not look up from my glass of sparkling water. "Correct," I replied evenly, my tone measured. "I am sitting in it." He let out a dry, mocking chuckle that grated against the background jazz music. "It is for my girlfriend. You and your little assistant should head back to the general guest section by the kitchen doors. You do not belong here, old man." Before Clara or I could utter a single syllable, Julian reached down, snatched my custom-engraved platinum name card from the table, and tossed it onto the marble floor. Then, with deliberate theatrical slowness, he ground his heel into it, scratching the precious metal and leaving a dark, dusty smudge completely obscuring my name. Clara stood up immediately, her face flushed with righteous anger. "Excuse me, do you have any earthly idea who you are talking to right now?" Julian ignored her completely. He pulled the heavy chair out for his girlfriend, gesturing for her to sit down, as if we were nothing more than invisible space. The girlfriend offered a victorious, smug smile, settling into the chair. Around us, the chatter at neighboring tables began to die down. The glitz of the high society gala faded as wealthy guests began to notice the confrontation. Several smartphones were discreetly raised, cameras rolling, capturing every agonizing second of the interaction. I leaned forward, my movements slow and deliberate. I bent down, picked up the bent, dirtied platinum card, and set it carefully back on the table. I looked Julian dead in the eye. My voice was quiet, steady, and entirely devoid of anger. "You really should not have done that," I stated simply. He laughed, loud enough for the surrounding 3 tables to hear clearly. "And what are you going to do about it? Call security? My mother owns the security contractor. She owns this entire hotel property. She owns the company you are clearly trying to leech off of." "What you just did," I said, projecting my voice just enough to ensure the recording smartphones would capture the audio perfectly, "just cost your mother exactly $1.3 billion. Julian's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a brief flicker of profound confusion, but his innate arrogance quickly surged back. "Let us get my mother down here then," he sneered, pulling out his phone. "Let us see if she can help you understand your actual place in this city." Clara leaned in, her eyes filled with genuine concern for the situation. "Harrison, we should leave," she whispered. "This is an utter waste of your valuable time." I raised a single finger, signaling her to remain perfectly calm. I stayed in my seat, waiting. The crowd around us was dead silent now, watching the drama unfold with bated breath. Julian dialed his phone. "Mom, get down to table 3 right now. There is some stubborn middle-aged boomer squatting in our VIP seats making insane claims about $1 billion. He is causing a scene and embarrassing us. The atmosphere in the room visibly shifted before Eleanor Thorne even entered our line of sight. The crowd of elites parted like the Red Sea. Eleanor walked in with the rigid posture of a woman who genuinely believed she was a monarch. She was 55 years old, dressed in a custom Parisian gown, her face a carefully constructed mask of absolute corporate authority. "What is the meaning of this disruption?" Eleanor demanded. Her voice as cold as liquid nitrogen. Julian immediately pointed a finger at me. "This nobody is refusing to vacate my table, Mom. He is ruining the entire evening for us." Eleanor's sharp eyes swept over me. Her gaze was quick, entirely dismissive, and utterly blind. She did not bother to look at the scratched platinum name card resting on the table. Nor did she recognize the face of the man her executive office had spent the last 4 agonized weeks sending urgent, desperate meeting invitations to. To her, I was just an older man in a conservative, unbranded charcoal suit, someone who simply did not fit the flashy profile of her preferred wealthy sycophants. "I am afraid this premium section is strictly reserved for our elite equity partners," Eleanor said, her tone dripping with heavily manufactured politeness. "Security, please escort this gentleman and his associate out through the service exit. We absolutely do not tolerate disruptions at our corporate events." Clara stepped forward, her voice ringing clear. "We have an official, documented invitation directly from your chief investment officer. We are here representing Vance Capital Management." Eleanor raised her hand sharply, cutting Clara off mid-sentence. "I do not care who you claim to represent tonight. Security, do your job and remove them immediately." 2 massive security guards in dark suits stepped forward, subtly placing their hands near their holsters. Julian smirked triumphantly, pulling his chair out further. "Sit back and relax." "Babe," he told his girlfriend loudly, "the trash has finally been cleared out." I did not resist. I stood up slowly, calmly adjusting the cuffs of my suit jacket. I picked up the ruined platinum name card one last time, locking eyes with Eleanor Thorne. "You will not remember this night the way you currently think you will, Eleanor," I said softly, yet loud enough for the cameras. "You will remember it as the exact minute you permanently lost Thorne Enterprises." She did not even dignify me with a response. She simply turned her back to me, already scanning the crowded ballroom for more important recognizable guests. I turned and walked out of the ballroom, Clara following closely behind, her tablet clutched tightly to her chest. Behind us, the classical string quartet started playing again, and the familiar sound of clinking champagne glasses returned, but the catastrophic damage was already permanently done. As we walked through the sprawling glass lobby and out into the cool, refreshing night air of the city, I pulled out my encrypted mobile device. "Cancel the pending wire transfer immediately," I instructed my lead institutional banker. "The Thorne Enterprises deal is completely dead." At that exact, fateful moment, Gregory Stanton, the chief investment officer of Stanton Global, the largest institutional shareholder of Thorne Enterprises, was trapped in a miserable gridlock traffic jam precisely 3 blocks away. Cold sweat was beating heavily on his forehead. Gregory knew exactly what I looked like, and he knew with absolute certainty that without my $1.3 billion injection, Thorne Enterprises would be legally forced to declare Chapter 11 bankruptcy before the end of the business week. His phone rang sharply. It was Eleanor's executive secretary. "Hi, Gregory," the secretary chirped cheerfully. "The gala is proceeding beautifully. Has Mr. Harrison Vance arrived yet?" Gregory gripped the leather steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. "I am stuck in awful traffic, but he should definitely be there by now. Did you personally welcome him?" "Well," the secretary hesitated, her tone faltering. "There was a very minor issue at table 3. An older gentleman was causing some trouble over a seating arrangement, but Eleanor had security escort him out through the back. He is gone now." Gregory felt the blood rapidly drain from his face. His heart practically stopped beating in his chest. "You escorted who out?" At that very second, his phone aggressively buzzed with an automated priority alert from the central banking system. The pending $1.3 billion capital injection from Vance Capital Management had been officially retracted. Reason code: material breach of executive respect and ethics protocols. "Turn the car around right now," Gregory screamed at his driver, panic lacing his voice. Not to the gala. We are going to Mr. Vance's private residence immediately. Step on it. The next morning at Thorne Enterprises headquarters, the tension in the air was thick enough to slice with a machete. On the 45th floor, inside the sprawling, glass-walled executive suite, the crucial morning briefing was fully underway. Eleanor Thorne sat at the head of the massive glass conference table, her expression unnervingly calm, though a sharp, brittle edge in her voice betrayed her mounting anxiety. It was just a minor, insignificant misunderstanding, Eleanor announced to the gathered executive board, waving her hand dismissively in the air. An older man falsely claiming to be an investor made an inappropriate scene at table 3, and we rightfully had him removed to fiercely protect the integrity of the event. It is absolutely nothing that affects the big picture of our national expansion. No one around the imposing table dared to contradict her. They all understood perfectly well that the Thorne family aggressively controlled the board, and challenging Eleanor was a guaranteed, rapid way to end a lucrative corporate career. In the sleek hallway outside, Julian Thorne was laughing loudly into his phone. "It is all completely settled, babe," he said, his voice echoing obnoxiously off the imported Italian marble walls. That old man was just some desperate social climber looking for a free meal and some pathetic attention. My mother tossed him out like the garbage he is. He will not be coming back, and we are already confidently looking at other funding options. He genuinely thought his reckless actions at the gala were merely a minor detail, a brief, enjoyable moment of asserting his social dominance that would yield zero real-world consequences. But on the 32nd floor, in the chief financial officer's isolated wing, there was absolutely no laughter to be found. The CFO, a heavily seasoned corporate veteran named Ronald Blake, stared unblinkingly at his computer monitor. The live cash flow chart was aggressively flatlining. "We are scheduled for the massive Phase 1 capital allocation in exactly 48 hours. Ronald stated, his voice visibly trembling as he looked at his team of senior analysts. "But the banking system is showing a catastrophic zero balance in the designated escrow account." The Vance Capital Management wire transfer code was officially retracted late last night. A junior analyst raised his hand timidly, sweating nervously. "Can we urgently request a delay from our primary contractors?" "A delay?" Ronald snapped, losing his composure. "A delay at this late stage means we legally default on our massive construction bonds. If that happens, our credit rating instantly drops to junk status by Friday afternoon. We do not just need a delay, we need a literal miracle from above." While the corporate tower was beginning to sweat bullets, the atmosphere at my private residence was remarkably different. I sat comfortably on the wide veranda of my home, a quiet, expansive estate surrounded by ancient oak trees, slowly sipping a cup of dark roast black coffee. The morning air was crisp and the only sound was the gentle rustling of leaves in the wind. Clara stood respectfully beside me, her tablet firmly in hand. She wore a calm, knowing smile on her face. "The main phone line has been ringing relentlessly since 6 in the morning, Harrison," she noted. "Gregory Stanton has called 14 separate times. Eleanor Thorne's executive office has called 8 times. They even desperately tried to contact your personal litigation attorney." "Let them ring," I replied smoothly, taking a slow, satisfying sip. A man who cannot control his own spoiled family cannot possibly be trusted to control a billion-dollar corporate expansion. Arrogance is a terminal disease that eventually destroys the host completely. I am simply letting the disease run its natural course. Before Clara could formulate a reply, the heavy security gate at the far edge of the driveway buzzed open. A sleek black sedan pulled up aggressively, and Gregory Stanton stepped out in a massive hurry. He looked utterly disheveled, his expensive tie crooked, and heavy sweat clearly staining the collar of his designer shirt. He practically sprinted up the stone steps to the veranda. "Mr. Vance, Harrison's," Gregory gasped, fighting to catch his breath. "Thank you immensely for seeing me. I drove to the gala last night, but by the time I finally arrived, you were already long gone." I pointed casually to an empty chair opposite me. "Sit down, Gregory. Have some fresh coffee." "I absolutely do not have time for coffee, Harrison," Gregory pleaded, his voice violently cracking. "The board is in a total, unmitigated panic. Eleanor Thorne is desperately trying to act like everything is perfectly under control, but the financial numbers do not lie. Without the $1.3 billion Vance capital injection, Thorne Enterprises is facing immediate technical insolvency by the end of the week. My father, Richard, is absolutely furious. He wants to know if there is any conceivable way to salvage this deal. I leaned back slowly in my chair, studying him closely. Gregory, I have known your father for over 20 years. I deeply respect Stanton Global, but my terms were explicitly clear. I do not ever partner with people who treat basic human respect as a luxury they can freely ignore. Julian Thorne threw my name card on the floor and aggressively stepped on it. Eleanor Thorne ordered security to escort me out like a common criminal. They made their conscious choice. Now they must live with the devastating cost. Gregory buried his face deeply in his hands in despair. I know. I saw the viral video. It is already circulating widely among all the major institutional shareholders. It looks incredibly terrible. But surely we can work out some sort of financial solution. Perhaps a massive public apology. A radical change in the board structure. It is entirely too late for simple apologies, Gregory, I stated firmly, but since you are here, I want to show you something critical. I nodded to Clara. She swiftly tapped her tablet and slid it across the table toward Gregory. What exactly is this? Gregory asked, squinting hard at the bright screen. While Eleanor and her entitled son were incredibly busy playing rulers of high society, my investigative team was conducting a deep, forensic audit of Thorne Enterprises' hidden subsidiary accounts, I explained coolly. We wanted to ensure our $1.3 billion would be placed in a completely clean financial system. Instead, we found something highly illegal and very interesting. Clara pointed precisely to the documented files on the screen. These are 3 completely separate short-term loan agreements signed secretly over the last 6 months, totaling a massive $85 million, she stated. They were quietly secured using Thorne Enterprises' absolute prime real estate assets as collateral. The highly suspicious loans were fully authorized by Julian Thorne. Gregory frowned deeply, his confusion evident. Julian is the vice president, but he definitely does not have the legal authority to pledge prime corporate assets without a full board resolution and the CEO's official signature. Precisely, I said, a slight smile forming. And if you look closely at the board resolutions securely attached to those loans, you will clearly see Eleanor Thorne's official signature. Gregory leaned in. So, look at the dates. Clara interjected smoothly. On the exact date of the second massive loan, Eleanor was visibly in Switzerland for a private medical checkup, completely off the grid. On the exact date of the third loan, she was publicly in Tokyo. Our forensic handwriting experts rigorously analyzed the signatures. They are highly sophisticated, deliberate copies. Gregory's eyes widened in sheer horror. His face turned from pale to completely white in seconds. You were saying Julian forged his own mother's signature to illegally get loans? Clara nodded emphatically. Yes, and he did it using a shady subsidiary company, registered deep in Delaware, that operates completely outside the main audit loop. The massive funds from those loans did not go to any Thorne projects. They were illegally funneled directly into a private shell company fully controlled by Julian and his girlfriend. I looked intently at Gregory, whose hands were now visibly shaking with terror. Under California Penal Code Section 470, forgery is a severe felony, and because I am an elder at 58, this also explicitly triggers the California Welfare and Institutions Code Section 15661030 for elder financial abuse. More importantly, because those executive signatures were illegally forged, the loan agreements are void ab initio. They are legally invalid from the very beginning. The exact moment the commercial banks find out, they will fiercely declare a fraud default and aggressively call in the massive loans immediately. Gregory stood up abruptly, his heavy chair scraping loudly against the expensive stone floor. This is massive criminal fraud. If this gets out to the public, the stock will violently crash. Thorne Enterprises will not just go bankrupt. The entire Thorne family will go to federal prison. Which is exactly why you urgently need to decide where Stanton Global firmly stands, Gregory, I said quietly, offering him a path. You are the largest institutional shareholder. You can either inevitably sink with the criminal Thorn family, or you can actively help me clear out the wreckage. Gregory stared blankly at the tablet, then directly at me, his breathing ragged. What do you want me to do? Tell your father to aggressively call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning, I instructed coldly, and tell him to keep his phone on. The real corporate storm has not even started yet. By Wednesday afternoon, the shocking video from the gala was no longer a private secret among the wealthy elite. It had leaked massively onto public social media platforms under a catchy title that spread like absolute wildfire. The price of a VIP seat at the Thorn table. The viral footage was crystal clear. It showed Julian Thorn obnoxiously throwing my platinum name card to the ground and aggressively stomping on it. It showed Eleanor Thorn, draped heavily in diamonds, looking down her nose at me with utter disdain and ordering security to drag me out through the service exit like absolute garbage. The sharp contrast between my quiet, calm demeanor and the Thorn family's raw, unchecked arrogance was incredibly striking. By the time the financial markets opened, the video had reached a staggering 5 million views. Thorn Enterprises' carefully crafted public image was utterly shattered in hours. Institutional shareholders clearly saw a prominent family that did not just lack respect, but lacked basic sanity, recklessly tossing away a $1.3 billion lifeline to satisfy the petty, ego-driven whims of an entitled heir. Within the first 2 grueling hours of trading, Thorn Enterprises' stock plummeted by a devastating 18%, erasing nearly $400 million in market capitalization. At the Vance Capital Management legal office in downtown Chicago, my elite team of ruthless attorneys was already moving fast. They filed a massive, complex lawsuit in the Delaware Court of Chancery. The legal complaint was not just a simple breach of contract. It was a direct, lethal blow aimed squarely at Eleanor Thorn's executive position. Clara walked swiftly into my office carrying a freshly printed copy of the massive filing. "It is entirely official, Harrison," she announced proudly. "The lawsuit is formally filed. We are suing Eleanor Thorn personally for a severe breach of fiduciary duty." "Explain the core of the suit for the legal record, Clara," I said calmly, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling skyline. Clara looked down at the dense papers. Under corporate law, Eleanor, as CEO and director, owes a strict fiduciary duty of care, loyalty, and good faith to Thorn Enterprises and its shareholders. By abruptly ejecting the lead investor of a critical $1.3 billion deal over a minor seating dispute involving her son's girlfriend, she acted in absolute bad faith. Her reckless actions directly caused the collapse of the vital funding deal and the subsequent 18% drop in the company's total valuation. We are aggressively seeking massive damages and a court-ordered injunction to freeze her executive powers completely. "Absolutely perfect," I replied, a cold smile touching my lips. "Let us see exactly how long her immense pride holds up under this crushing pressure." Over at the Thorn Enterprises corporate headquarters, the atmosphere was completely chaotic. The phone lines in the public relations office were jammed completely solid with calls from furious institutional investors. In the opulent executive suite, Eleanor Thorn sat paralyzed, staring at the legal complaint that had just been hand-delivered directly to her mahogany desk. Her manicured hands were trembling slightly as she forcefully picked up her phone and called the company's chief legal counsel, a veteran corporate attorney named David Black. "What in the world is this garbage Vance filed?" Eleanor demanded furiously, desperately trying to keep her voice steady. "Breach of fiduciary duty? That is completely ridiculous. It was a private event. I have the absolute right to remove anyone I want from my personal party." There was a very long, ominous pause on the other end of the line. "Eleanor," David said, his voice completely flat, "this is absolutely not a private party issue. You were prominently there in your capacity as CEO of a publicly traded company. The gala was heavily funded by corporate money explicitly to secure investors. The viral video clearly shows you throwing out the very investor who is bringing in $1.3 billion. The court will see this as gross negligence and extreme bad faith. If this inevitably goes to trial, you will lose massively. The board can and will hold you personally liable for the lost corporate valuation." Eleanor violently slammed the phone down in pure rage. At that exact moment, Julian casually walked into the office holding a cup of artisan coffee. He looked slightly annoyed but still arrogantly carried his usual smug expression. "Mom, have you seen the stock price?" Julian asked lazily. "Some stupid internet activists are calling for a massive boycott of our retail centers. People are so incredibly sensitive these days. It was literally just a chair." Eleanor stood up abruptly, her eyes blazing with a terrifying rage Julian had never seen before. "Just a chair?" Eleanor screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing violently through the heavy double doors. "That chair just cost us $400 million in market value in 2 agonizing hours. That chair has brought a lethal federal-level lawsuit directly to my desk. Your arrogant, stupid behavior last night is destroying absolutely everything I built." Julian's smug look finally vanished completely. He took a nervous step back, quickly setting his coffee down on a side table. "Mom, we can just aggressively find another investor. There are plenty of huge funds in New York." "No, there are not," Eleanor yelled frantically. "No serious firm will ever touch us now. The video actively proves we are utterly unstable. No one is going to casually hand $1.3 billion to a company where the CEO's idiotic son can throw their elite representatives out of a room on a petty whim." Before Julian could formulate a reply, Eleanor's private desk phone buzzed loudly. It was the heavily restricted private line. The caller ID read, "Richard Stanton." Eleanor took a deep, shaky breath, trying desperately to calm her racing heart, and picked up the heavy receiver. "Richard, I was just about to call you. I can explain. I do not want to hear your pathetic explanations, Eleanor." Richard Stanton's voice was like freezing ice. His tone was incredibly heavy, carrying the undeniable weight of a powerful man who owned 35% of her company. "My son Gregory came back from Harrison Vance's estate this morning. He told me absolutely everything. It was just a minor misunderstanding at the party." Eleanor started desperately, her voice cracking noticeably. Julian was just, "Enough," Richard interrupted violently. "Your son is a useless parasite, Eleanor, and you have proven to be a massive, unacceptable liability to this corporation. Your stubborn pride has cost my fund over $100 million in paper losses just today. I have officially called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning at exactly 9 a.m. We are going to address this permanently." Eleanor's eyes narrowed sharply, her old, ingrained defensive instincts fiercely kicking in. "You cannot legally force me out, Richard. My family still strictly controls 40% of the voting shares. The board simply cannot remove me without my explicit consent." "We will definitively see about that, Eleanor," Richard said quietly, with deadly intent. "You might stubbornly control the shares, but you absolutely do not control the law. I highly advise you to passionately prepare your defense because tomorrow you are going to need it desperately." The line went dead with a sharp click. Eleanor slowly lowered the phone, her face totally pale. She turned to Julian, who was standing completely still near the door. "Get your lawyers, Julian," Eleanor whispered, a terrible, cold dread finally settling deep in her chest. Tomorrow is going to be an absolute war. She genuinely thought she was ready for the fight. She arrogantly believed her 40% voting bloc was an impenetrable fortress wall that would effortlessly protect her family's empire. But she had absolutely no idea that the real lethal weapon I was holding was not the civil lawsuit. It was the forged legal documents sitting quietly on my desk, waiting patiently to be revealed to the world. The morning of the emergency board meeting, the massive conference room on the 45th floor of Thorne Enterprises felt exactly like a federal courtroom. Outside, heavy rain was pouring aggressively against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. Inside, the heavy silence was deafening. Eleanor and Julian Thorne arrived very early, impeccably dressed in high-end designer suits, desperately attempting to project an image of absolute, unshaken control. They sat rigidly on one side of the vast mahogany table. On the other side sat Richard Stanton and Gregory Stanton, along with 4 other major, deeply concerned board members. At exactly 9 a.m., the heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open. But it was not a secretary entering. I walked in, followed closely by Clara and our lead corporate attorney, a ruthless man named Alexander Reed, who carried a thick, imposing black leather briefcase. Eleanor's eyes flared instantly with raw anger. She stood up immediately. pointing a finger. "This is a closed board meeting, Harrison," she hissed aggressively. "You have absolutely no standing here. You completely retracted your investment. You are an outsider now." I calmly walked to the head of the heavy table, deliberately pulled out a chair, and sat down. I gently set my ruined, scratched platinum name card from the gala right in front of me on the mahogany. "Actually, Eleanor, I have every legal right to be here," I replied, my voice chillingly cool and perfectly even. "I was officially invited by Richard Stanton, who legally represents 35% of the voting shares. And much more importantly, I am here as the largest single creditor of this corporation." Eleanor let out a sharp, incredibly bitter laugh. "Creditor? Our massive debt is held entirely by commercial banks. You do not own a single corporate bond, Vance." I nodded slowly to Alexander. He clicked open the heavy briefcase and slid a thick stack of complex legal documents smoothly across the table. One complete set went directly to Richard, and the other went directly to Eleanor. Yesterday afternoon, Vance Capital Management completely purchased $85 million in short-term promissory notes directly from Pacific Coast Capital, Alexander explained, his voice aggressively professional and bone-dry. These massive notes were illegally secured using three of Thorn Enterprises' premier, flagship retail properties as direct collateral. The documents were signed and fully authorized by Julian Thorn, acting supposedly as Vice President of Global Business Development. Eleanor frowned deeply in absolute confusion, rapidly turning to Julian. "Julian, what on earth is he talking about? You definitely do not have the executive authority to sign for those massive loans without my strict counter-signature." I smiled slightly, a cold, predatory expression. "She is absolutely correct, Julian. You definitely did not have the authority. But you conveniently solved that annoying problem by simply forging her signature for her." The entire room went dead silent. "On page 3 of the document in front of you, you will see a highly detailed forensic handwriting analysis," I said, looking directly and unblinkingly at Eleanor. "And on page 5, you will see the undeniable digital audit trail. The electronic signature file for Eleanor Thorne was illegally accessed from an IP address directly registered to Julian's private luxury penthouse on a Tuesday night at exactly 11:30 p.m. On that exact date and time, Eleanor, you were firmly in Zurich, Switzerland, actively attending a high-level medical conference. You had absolutely no internet access." Julian's face turned from a hot flush of defensive anger to a pale, heavily sweating mask of absolute terror. "This is a massive lie," Julian shouted desperately, slamming his hand violently on the table. "It is a complete setup. They hacked the system. Silence!" Richard Stanton roared furiously, his powerful voice shaking the heavy glass walls. He glared at Julian with pure disgust. "Shut your pathetic mouth," Alexander continued smoothly, completely ignoring Julian's hysterical outburst. "Under California Penal Code Section 470, forgery is a severe felony. Furthermore, under California Welfare and Institutions, Code Section 1561030, because Mr. Vance is 58, this constitutes elder financial abuse, as the fraud impacts his newly acquired debt holdings. Because the authorization documents were heavily forged, the loan agreements are void ab initio. They are legally invalid from the very beginning. Pacific Coast Capital has already declared a massive material fraud default. And since Vance Capital Management now legally owns those notes, we have forcefully issued an immediate legal demand for acceleration. We want our $85 million back within exactly 24 hours. Eleanor stared blankly at the documents, her eyes incredibly wide with unadulterated horror. She slowly turned her head to look directly at her son. "Julian, tell me this is a huge mistake," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Tell me you absolutely did not do this." Julian could not look her in the eye. He stared desperately down at the table, his breathing incredibly shallow and erratic. "Eleanor," I said, leaning forward aggressively, "it gets much, much worse. Because Thorn Enterprises obviously cannot pay $85 million in 24 hours. The standard cross-default clauses on your other $300 million in massive commercial loans have just been completely triggered. The global banks were officially notified of the fraud default at 8:30 a.m. today. As of 9:15 a.m., all of Thorn Enterprises' primary operating accounts have been entirely frozen. You are officially, technically insolvent. Eleanor slumped heavily back into her plush leather chair. The immense pride, the unchecked arrogance, the perceived impenetrable shield of her family name. All of it evaporated into thin air in a single, devastating second. She looked exactly like a woman who had just realized she was standing firmly on a trapdoor and the heavy rope had just been forcefully pulled. "This is massive criminal misconduct," Richard Stanton said quietly, looking at Eleanor with absolute terrifying disgust. "The corporate veil is permanently pierced. You and Julian are completely personally liable for this massive fraud. The commercial banks will come aggressively after your personal estate, your mansions, your luxury cars, absolutely everything. You will be facing total devastating bankruptcy and a very long federal prison sentence." "There is exactly one way out, Eleanor," I said quietly, offering the final blow. She looked up quickly, her eyes incredibly desperate, clinging pitifully to any tiny shred of hope. "What? What do you want, Vance?" "Vance Capital Management will completely buy out the Thorne family's entire 40% voting block," I stated coldly. "We will pay you exactly 20 cents on the dollar, based strictly on yesterday's devastated market close. That money will absolutely not go to you. It will go directly and immediately to pay off the $85 million forged criminal debt, clearing the criminal liability and barely saving your pathetic son from immediate federal prosecution." Eleanor visibly gasped. 20 cents? That is absolute pennies. We built this entire company from the ground up. "You completely destroyed it," I replied coldly, pointing firmly to the ruined, scratched platinum name card resting on the table. "You destroyed it. The exact moment you let your unchecked arrogance blind you. You foolishly thought money gave you the divine right to treat people like absolute trash. You mistakenly thought a seat at a VIP table made you completely untouchable. Now you do not even own the room." I stood up slowly, calmly adjusting my suit. "You have exactly until 12 p.m. sharp to sign the transfer papers and submit your unconditional, immediate resignations from all executive positions. If you sign, the debt is cleared and you walk away with your freedom, though you will be completely broke. If you do not sign, the district attorney will have active federal warrants for both of your arrests by 1 p.m. I turned and walked firmly toward the exit, Clara and Alexander right behind me. "Harrison!" Eleanor called out, her voice cracking pitifully, completely devoid of the terrifying ice she had held the night before. "Please." I did not stop. I walked straight through the heavy double doors, leaving the silent boardroom to its complete, utter destruction.